The forest howled like a wounded beast. Rain sliced through the towering pines, sharp as glass. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the earth beneath soaked moss and broken branches. Somewhere deep in that wilderness, a man stood alone, coat soaked through, rifle clenched in calloused hands, his eyes narrowed against the wind. He watched from beneath his brim as a woman and 3 children dragged a splintered wagon through the muck, their forms flickering like ghosts in the stormlight. Elias Shaw wasn't a man of many words. Grizzled and broad-shouldered, with a beard, matted from months without a blade or company, he lived far from the nearest town, by choice. He had once marched beneath banners, fought in blue through the smoke and blood of the Civil War. But war had taken more than it gave. Now he lived in silence, a solitary figure among the trees. His cabin perched on a cliffside overlooking a sea of endless green. He passed his days chopping wood, tending a threadbare garden, and speaking only to the fire when the nights were long and the ghosts came back. The war had stolen everything, his wife, his son, the easy laughter that used to find him in quieter times. In its place, it left him with scars and silence. He wanted nothing more than to disappear, and then came the storm. And the woman, her name, she would tell him later, was Margaret Alton. Her husband had been a merchant, respected and kind, until bandits rode through 2 counties over and left nothing but ashes behind. Now she wandered with her 3 children, all under 10, faces hollow, clothes soaked, their wagon shattered in the muck. Elias found them collapsed beneath a rocky overhang, the youngest burning with fever, the mother with bloodied palms from dragging broken wheels through the mud. He didn't want to help. Didn't want the noise, the mess, the aching reminder of what he'd lost. But as he turned to leave, a tiny hand reached out and clutched his boot. A boy's eyes, glassy with sickness, met his. Elias felt something shift inside him. A dam. Long held, beginning to crack. Without a word, he lifted the boy into his arms. He brought them to his home. The cabin was too small for 4 new souls. The food stores were tight. What little game he'd smoked might not last the winter. And the children were loud, curious, always underfoot. Elias kept to his chores, shoulders stiff, eyes averted. He didn't ask questions, didn't welcome company. Margaret didn't ask for his charity either. She worked beside him, blistering her hands on the axe handle, milking his aging goat, patching what clothes she could with threadbare skill. She moved with a quiet pride, refusing pity. He noticed the way she held her head high, even as her stomach growled in silence. Still, the unease lingered. The children tiptoed around him like mice in a barn, wary of his scowl. One morning, the youngest, barely more than a toddler, knocked over Elias's tools while playing. Elias barked, voice sharp as a rifle crack. The boy froze, eyes wide, then burst into tears. That night, Elias stared into the fire long after the cabin fell quiet. He saw flames again, but not the hearth's glow. He saw a village in ruin, a child screaming, smoke thick in his lungs. He closed his eyes, fists tight. The next morning he carved a whistle from pine, said nothing, left it by the boy's bedroll. A few nights later, a pair of warm socks showed up near Margaret's boots, then a handful of berries by the girl's cup. No words, just quiet offerings in place of apologies. One morning, with snow yet to fall, but the air sharpening, Elias stepped out to check the shed, and stopped. Boot prints, fresh, too large for a child. Not his. The livestock were restless in their pens, hooves tapping the ground like warnings. Overhead, a crow flew low and fast, wings slicing through the mist. Something wasn't right. He turned, rifle already in hand, and stepped back inside. "I'll stay inside," he muttered to Margaret. His voice was low, clipped, the soldier in him rising like smoke. "Lock the door." Then he stepped out into the trees. From somewhere far down the slope, a single shot cracked the silence. Then came the scream. The scream came again, fainter this time, like a ghost's last breath pulled away by the wind. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved fast, rifle cradled close, boots soundless on the wet pine needles. Mist curled low along the forest floor like fingers grasping for him, as if the land itself knew what he was walking into. Ahead, a rusted horseshoe was nailed to a tree. He paused. An old hunter's sign. Strangers nearby. He dropped into a crouch near the ridge, parting the brush with the muzzle of his rifle. Below, a sagging shack leaned against the hillside. 3 men circled it, bandits by the way they moved. One had a woman by the hair, her knees buckled, her cries lost to the wind. Elias didn't recognize her, but the look in their eyes, cruel and hungry, was all he needed to know. Predators, he breathed slow, let his body go still. Then, crack. One bandit dropped, dead before he hit the ground. The others scrambled, diving for cover, yelling over one another. Bullets flew wild, thudding into bark and soil. Elias was already moving, low and silent, sliding between trees like a shadow. Another shot rang out, not his, from the opposite side. One of the men shouted and ran, bolting toward the deeper woods. Elias gave chase, following the crackling brush and panicked breathing until he cornered him near a dry creek bed. The man dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. "We weren't going to hurt no one. Just needed food." Elias hesitated, eyes narrowed. Then he swung the butt of his rifle hard. The man crumpled. When he returned to the shack, the 3rd bandit was gone. So was the woman. Blood stained the snow fresh and dark. Something rustled in the trees. A figure stepped forward. He was tall and lean, wrapped in animal hides, hair braided down his back. His eyes were polished stone, sharp, unreadable. A native warrior standing with the stillness of a tree. Elias raised his rifle. The man didn't flinch. "I took her," he said in a voice like gravel. "She lives, but not safe." He gave only his name, Waya. He spoke little, using his hands and the tilt of his head more than words. Elias saw it in the way he moved, measured, deliberate, like a man used to walking alone in dangerous places. There was no fear in him, but no softness either. Just the hard certainty of someone who had lived long and survived much. They buried the dead together. The bandit Elias had killed, the one Waya had found dying. Not for mercy, just necessity. After, Waya looked to the sky. "More coming," he said, his voice low. "You'll need help." Then, without sound, he disappeared. Into the trees. Elias returned to the cabin under a darkening sky. His coat was torn, dried blood crusted on his sleeve. He opened the door quietly. Inside, Margaret sat with the children huddled around her. The hearth cast flickering gold across their faces. She looked up as he entered, but said nothing. She handed him a bowl of stew. He took it and sat beside her. They ate in silence, the crackle of the fire their only company. "I lost my husband last spring," she said at last. Her voice was quiet but steady. They left him in the field like a dog. Elias didn't look at her, just stared into the flames. "The world's gone cruel," he murmured. She nodded once, then pulled her youngest child into her lap. The next day, something shifted. Elias took Samuel, the oldest, out into the woods and taught him to set snares. Showed the middle child, Grace, how to find trail signs, bent twigs, claw marks, the smooth glide of a fox's belly through snow. Clara, the baby of the three, followed him everywhere with clumsy steps, a wooden whistle always in her mouth. Margaret patched his coat, then used scraps to sew him a new shirt, rough but warm. He wore it without a word, but she caught the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth when she handed it to him. There were no grand speeches, no thank yous. Just a nod, a shared glance. Quiet understanding. Elias had once believed his heart had turned to stone, hardened by fire and loss. But now, with these strangers under his roof, warmth crept in where cold had ruled for years. It came in small things, a child's giggle, the creak of the floorboards as Margaret moved in the early morning, the smell of stew instead of smoke. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt it. Then, one morning, he stepped outside and froze. Tracks in the snow again. Fresh, deep, deliberate. Not a hunter's pass or a wandering deer. These were wide, heavy. More than one. A mark on the tree. A branch bent backward, unnaturally. The kind of sign only a tracker would know to leave. Wyatt appeared without warning, breath fogging in the cold. His expression was tight. "Raiders," he said. "They found your trail. Days, maybe hours." Elias's jaw clenched. He turned back toward the cabin, where Margaret was feeding the children, where firelight danced against the windows, unaware of the storm that loomed beyond the trees. "We'll have to fight," he said. Elias and Wyatt worked without sleep, hands steady and minds grim. The woods became a web of traps, hidden snares and fallback paths, sharp stakes in shallow pits, warning bells strung with thread. The cabin wouldn't last under real fire, but it could buy time. And time, they hoped, could buy survival. Margaret listened carefully as Elias showed her how to hold the revolver. Her hands trembled at first, knuckles white with fear. He didn't soften his voice, just gave her the truth. "You aim low. You don't stop until they stop." She nodded once. "I won't let them take my children." Wyatt took the kids deep into the hills, to a cave masked by ferns and shadow. He would keep them safe while Elias and Margaret held the line. Night settled slow and heavy. The trees grew still. Even the wind seemed to hush. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled. A second answered, closer. Elias sat beneath the porch, rifle ready. Margaret stood just behind him, tucked against the doorway. Her breaths came fast and shallow. Before the sun rose, they came. 6 men, hard-eyed and lean, rifles slung low. They moved through the mist like ghosts with bad intentions. Elias watched from the trees, counting their steps, measuring their patterns. Then everything exploded. One bandit screamed, his leg caught in a hidden snare. Gunfire cracked wild into the sky. Elias dropped him before the others could spot the muzzle flash. Another charged, flanking from the east. Elias ran, darting through the brush, drawing fire away from the cabin. Margaret didn't flinch. She stepped onto the porch and fired once. The shot echoed through the trees. A man spun and hit the ground hard, clutching his stomach. But 2 reached the door. They burst through it, finding an empty cabin. Margaret had already slipped out the back, leaving a trap rigged above the doorframe. A bucket of ash and pitch fell, blinding them as they stumbled. Elias hit them like thunder, hatchet in one hand, the other swinging fists. The fighting was savage, personal. One man stabbed Elias in the shoulder. He grunted, rage pushing past pain, head-butted the attacker, wrestled his rifle away, and fired, point blank. No hesitation. The last one came like a bear, big, brutal, fast. He knocked Elias off his feet, and they rolled across the snow, grunting, striking, blood mixing with frost. Then a whistle cut the chaos. Waya. The man froze, confused, and that was all Margaret needed. Her shot cracked through the trees, and the raider collapsed in the snow beside Elias. Silence returned, thick and heavy. They lay gasping, surrounded by the dead. The snow was painted in streaks of red, trees splintered, smoke coiled upward from the cabin like breath from a battered lung. Margaret dropped to her knees, revolver clutched tight in both hands. "It's over," she whispered. Elias nodded, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "For now." Waya stepped from the trees, the children behind him, eyes wide and silent. No one spoke as they walked back to the cabin. They buried the bodies by the ridge that afternoon. No markers, no prayers. That night the cabin was warm with quiet, not fear, just silence. A peace earned the hard way. Elias sat near the hearth, shoulder bandaged, hands raw. The children were curled at his feet, their breathing soft and even. Margaret mended the torn sleeve of his coat by firelight. He looked at her, at them. The room, the warmth. This wasn't a shelter anymore. It was a home. Spring came slow, pulling green shoots from frozen soil. Margaret planted rows of beans and squash near the cliff's edge. The children built birdhouses from scrap wood and tin. Elias showed them how to move through the woods without leaving a trail, how to hunt without cruelty, how to thank the land. Waya came and went like wind, never staying more than a day. One morning, Elias walked him to the edge of the trees. "You could stay," he said. Waya shook his head. "This is not my place, but you found yours." Elias watched him vanish into the forest, then turned back toward the cabin. Smoke rose gently from the chimney. Laughter echoed faintly behind the walls. Once, he had been a man hollowed by loss. Now he stood, not whole, but healing. And in time, Elias stopped calling them guests. He added 2 rooms to the cabin, planted saplings for each of the children with stones bearing their names. When travelers passed, they didn't see survivors. They saw a family. Not all scars heal, but some become the very seams that hold us together. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like Elias's remind us that even in the deepest woods and darkest hours, love can still find its way home.